Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Tasha's Tales. Today we are joined by Sara. Sara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Sara, and I'm a clinical pharmacist and PhD in use of anti-diabetics. Do lots of different things. That's a story for another day. But I think the reason I have been invited here today is really that I was born and grown up in Copenhagen, and then I moved here 9 years ago, and I speak Pothwari, which the two of us really, connected over. And yeah.
We are celebrating the South Asian Heritage Month, and I guess when you mentioned that you also speak in Pothwari, I was like, yes, because so the title of this episode is Pothwari is not just a language. For me personally, it's not just a language. For me, it's my identity. It's my sense of belonging. It's not just a language because it represents kind of my heritage. What does it mean for you?
So for me, I think personally, in my younger days, I didn't embrace it as much as I do now. And especially after having children, it's something I've reflected a lot more on who am I and, which things like do I want to pass on to my children as well. So I think it's something I reflected a lot more on, like, yeah, in my 25 plus is. So maybe like the 10 years really because when I was growing up, and I think I mentioned that to you as well before, that when I was growing up, it was not very common to speak Batwari. So most people that I know who are my age, they would either just speak Danish or they would speak Urdu. So even if they had like Batwari speaking parents, their parents would teach them Urdu. So it was not very common, but my mom spoke Batwari, and she didn't speak Danish. So we were like taught to speak Pothwari from literally day one.
Oh wow. Okay, so for anyone listening and they don't know what Patwari is a language and it's spoken in different parts in Pakistan, just a few different parts in Pakistan and in Azad Kashmir. And within Patwari, there's different dialects. So I know you guys are from a different city to us all together in Pakistan. We're from Azad Kashmir, so our Patwari is a little bit different to yours. So even within Patwari, there's different dialects that make you kind of know where someone's from just by the way they're speaking and the dialect that they're using. Again, similar to you, I spent 13 years of my life in Azad Kashmir, and even though I was exposed to people speaking in Patwari around me, actually my family and my elders spoke to me in Urdu. So my Patwari is actually really, really broken. I can understand it perfectly, but when I speak, I do lack confidence in speaking Patwari.
Funnily enough, my I have two brothers, and none of them are like as fluent as I am. Having that said, when it comes to Urdu, it's quite similar. My husband is always like my brother when he tries to speak Urdu in public, he's like, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Just speak English." You know,
Yeah.
like his Urdu is like very, very broken, and Patwari is like he speaks it, but there are like Danish words in between. Like anybody who's speaking Urdu, they would speak English in between stuff. So when he speaks, like my brothers, my siblings speak Patwari, they would speak like Danish in between, and that's just how we used to do it as children. And sort of, if you grown up with it, you just keep doing it.
So are you fluent in Patwari?
Yes.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And is it something that you are speaking to your children in?
No. So what we do is, so my husband's family is obviously Urdu speaking, and then his family speaks Punjabi, and he's grown up speaking Urdu. So what we do at home is we speak Urdu. We try to teach them Urdu. So I think that is something we become quite conscious about in the later year or so that, because initially we did try to teach my daughter Danish as well, but she was struggling to speak. So we were like, okay, she needs to be able to speak English. She goes to nursery. She needs to be able to communicate with them. So we just went for that. And now when she has started talking and we had another baby, we're like, okay, we need to start teaching them Danish and Urdu if we want to, otherwise it's going to be too late. So now we just keep telling her, the baby only speaks Danish. And then we try to focus a bit on like speaking Urdu as well. So obviously my mom has has learned a lot of Urdu since having grandchildren because that's how she communicates with them. So although we learned Pothwari, her Urdu has become a lot better over the years now. So that's what she speaks to them. So it's growing on them. And obviously, my daughter has grandparents on her dad's side who speaks Urdu as well. So she's exposed a lot to it. She's quite selective about whether she wants to answer you or not. And she doesn't understand everything, but she does understand quite a lot of it.
I think that's incredible because so my Patwari is not great anyway. My Urdu's good, but for whatever reason, I feel like I really slacked in teaching my children Urdu. I mean, my eldest is 5.5, nearly 6, and he does not understand Urdu at all. And I was thinking about it before doing this podcast. I was thinking, oh gosh, it's so sad that over the generations, are we just losing even the concept of Patwari? Like, yeah, Urdu's there for me, and my children do listen to us speak in Urdu, and sometimes I'll speak to them in Urdu. But the concept of Patwari is completely
Mm,
lost in my household, which is really, really sad. So I'm glad we're having this conversation
mm,
because I feel like I need to instill that in them so at least they
mm,
have an awareness of what Patwari is because I feel like it's a
mm.
large part of who we are and where we come from.
I think, given that, this event is really about South Asian heritage and free to be me, I think it's one of the things that over the years have been my reflection, has been a lot. I don't wear I don't wear shalwar kameez a lot. And I have not done it for years and years. And then we had my eldest, she's turning 5 tomorrow. And then now she's at the impressionable age. So we literally say, do you want to wear Pakistani princess clothes? And she's like, yeah, I want to wear Pakistani princess clothes. She doesn't really know that it's called shalwar kameez, but she knows it's Pakistani princess clothes. And she gets to wear like bangles with it and everything. And she gets so excited. But I am trying to make a more conscious effort of like wearing Pakistani clothes or we speak more Urdu to her just because we're like, as you said, do we want our children to grow up with the values that we grew up with or don't we? So they're like certain things. I think as you grow, especially when you are like in your late teens and 20s, you sort of define yourself as a person and from how you were brought up towards like being you. So which values do you carry over? And in that duration, I think what happens, at least for me, was that you distance yourself from a lot of things that you thought you didn't want. And then all of a sudden, you realize the value of these things. And I think that's what happened to me after we had children. And then you sort of go back, reconnect to those things again. Um, yeah, so yeah,
Yeah,
does that make sense? Yeah.
no, absolutely. I could relate to every single word of what you said because, growing up in Pakistan or Azad Kashmir for 13 years and then coming to England, trying to find my feet to fit in with everybody else and,
Mm,
figuring out a new identity. I went through a phase of questioning a lot of things and as I'm getting older, similar to yourself, now that I have children, I am finding myself going back to my
mm,
roots, my heritage,
yeah.
my history, my family history, where we come from, what we represent. And I mean, it's up to my children what they want to do in the next 10, 20, 30 years. However, I feel like it's my duty to pass the information to them so at least they have access to, who they are. So they're not lost or having some sort of identity crisis because they don't have the answers. I just want them to have the answers readily available. But it's
Mm,
really interesting, isn't it? The concept of free to be me. I really
mm.
wanted to touch on that a little bit because obviously you've got your experience of growing up in Denmark and then moving to the UK. Tell me a little bit about that. What was it like growing up in Denmark in comparison to the UK?
I think because Denmark is a much smaller country, the community is a lot smaller. So there's like lots of Pakistanis, but as compared to here, there are not a lot of Pakistanis. Like, especially for my family, it has been one of the families who went to Denmark in the late 60s, early 70s. So they've been there forever. And like literally anybody and everybody would know my family in one way or the other. So growing up, I think we had a community of people. Uh, but having that said, I think everybody was sort of on their own, did their own thing a lot more. And I think people were a lot more integrated in the society, like, speaking, like, this is something I touched on with my husband that he picked up on, that when he goes to Denmark, we do a lot of the Danish celebrations. So that might be like a lot of the celebrations, we would just be a part of it and we just celebrate it in our own way. Like, we do like Christmas Eve. It wouldn't be for Christmas Eve, but it would just be the fact that we get together because it's a day where everybody gets together. It doesn't have to hold any religious meaning. So my husband is something he's like picked up a lot on, that you guys actually celebrate a lot of, this events and the stuff that they do. And he actually really likes that because it's really an excuse to get together, isn't it? And that's how we were brought up, how we were raised, because we were so many cousins and like had a big family. Um, and I think when I moved here, I sort of picked up on like I think especially with my work that a lot more people speak in Pothwari, a lot more Urdu, and probably actually I just remembered something like when I came here the very first time. I came here to do an internship with like 13 months, and I went to Walthamstow, and I heard people speaking Potwari everywhere, and I was like, "What? They're speaking Potwari everywhere?" And I was really like, I have to call my mom and tell her because it was so unusual, something I had not experienced before. That you go out and people just speak like Potwari or Urdu in the shops, because we don't really experience that. Because, as I said, we do have the community, but we don't have it to that extent that, obviously, if you go and speak Urdu to somebody, they will reply if they speak Urdu, but not in the way where it's just like the common thing to do.
Yeah. So do you feel that you were integrated more in Denmark in comparison to South Asians in the UK?
I think it's hard to say because I moved here when I was still finding my feet. I was still finding my identity. So I was like in that cross between like moving away from the values I had grown up with towards like creating my own values. And at that time, I was probably in like a identity crisis, figuring out who am I. And to be honest, it's probably in my late 20s I really figured out like I started in my early 20s, but it's probably towards the end of my 20s where I really figured out, okay, this is important to me, this isn't important to me. And that just like kept growing for me. So I think it's a really difficult question to answer.
Yeah, and I think it's
But
complex as well, isn't it? I think because
yeah,
with our identity, it changes so frequently because whilst we are trying to find our identity, other things are also changing for us because we're also
mm,
entering different chapters of our lives, whether that's marriage or children or career.
exactly.
So it's kind of that cross between your own identity and where you come from and where you fit in, but also trying to figure
Mm,
your feet in the world in terms of being the
mm,
mom and working and that kind of thing. So, no, I totally get that. I think my experience of coming to the UK has always been a positive one. I feel like, especially as a 13-year-old, the only person of color in the school, I felt like I was accepted quite quickly, which is probably quite refreshing when I
mm,
think back and reflect. I think that's quite refreshing
mm.
for me. But yeah, equally, I think my Kashmiri identity was a bit lost them years for sure.
See, my experience was actually quite different because although we had all of that community, my parents chose to send us to Danish private school where they were like white people only. So it was like me and my brothers and two girls from our extended family, and it was just like us brown skinned people among all of these people, and and we stood out. We stood out because like if you see like an all white school, it's a private school, all white school, and you see like five brown people, we stood out. I remember like particularly I've been told this like later on. I've still been in touch with my class teacher from like my Danish class teacher from school,
Oh wow.
and when in my uni days I used to like frequently visit her, and like my she was there for my wedding, and like she's met my family and everything. And I remember when I was in uni, she told me like one time I came to visit her, and I don't know what we are talking about, and she told me that one of the parents had actually made a complaint that Sarah had been graded higher in Danish and history than their children because their children came home and told us. And obviously, her being her, she said like she deserves it. And that's why she's not been favored in any way. But to them parents, they were like, oh, this brown girl, why is she getting better grades in Danish than my child is? But obviously like I was not aware of it at the time, and she only told me like years and years later, because we were talking about these kind of topics. And obviously I wouldn't be connected to her if she wasn't the kind of person that you could discuss these things with, because obviously she was aware when I was in school that we were different, but she didn't see it that way because she like traveled a lot, and like she's been to the USA, and she had like a different understanding of culture, identity of people. So yeah, so she was very different. And even like a lot of the teachers, they would be quite biased, but because she was there, and she would always like, I know that like there were certain things where she would always like pick a fight for me, especially when she felt like I was unfairly treated. So I think for me, it wasn't. When I went off to high school, that was like my first exposure of having classmates of the same skin color as me, having been with people who had the same similar background to myself, and it was very different. And I think that's really when I started realizing like certain things I would do, I would say people would pick up on it, because that's just how I work. I don't have like examples because I actually don't remember any, but I do remember this used to be a frequent topic that they thought, well, how do you know this Danish word? Or like, why you like that or whatever? And they'd be like, oh, that must be because you come from a Danish private school sort of thing.
Oh,
Um,
right,
and,
okay.
and and I think it's like then I moved on, like I went to uni and I sort of really started finding myself. I actually started wearing hijab then as well. And my parents was so against it.
Which is
And
absolutely crazy because you would think, coming from a Muslim Pakistani family, they would encourage you to wear hijab.
thing is just like in my family we do have like a good mix, but most people, especially at the time, they wouldn't. It's something that has come a lot later. So after I stopped wearing hijab, that's actually when other people started wearing the hijabs. But for me that was like a part of my identity journey, really figuring out who am I. And this, I think I'm actually grateful that I've been on this journey, having that time to reflect on who am I. And I've just like for years and years. As I said, I started in my early 20s, and I was like late 20s where I really realized, okay, I'm finding my feet with what my identity is, and these kind of things.
Absolutely. I think, when I was saying that I was accepted in the school, by that I mean they were curious. People were curious where I came from because I was the person who came from Pakistan. They hadn't heard of, the word
Yeah.
Pakistan. So I felt like I was accepted. There was no racism, there was no discrimination, none that I'm aware of. I mean, what happened while I wasn't there, I don't know. I can't speak
Mm,
for that. But I didn't really feel othered.
mm.
However, saying that, when I went to university, I did seek out other brown people, other people of color who
People that
could
look
relate
like
to
you, isn't
me.
it?
Yeah, because again, when you say the word Pothwari, my
Mm,
goodness me, like my heart
mm,
skips a beat a little bit just because you think, oh gosh, like that's something that I can resonate with. That's something that I grew up around. So you've got that similarity, a unique similarity that you kind of crave, I think. And funny you mentioned hijab because I have thought about wearing a hijab for years, haven't quite got to the next stage, but
mm,
I feel like it's a huge part of being Muslim and that identity, but equally taking that step to start wearing it is not an easy one as well because I think a lot of things change. Be what I notice is when I'm out and about and I look at the experiences of my hijabi friends in comparison to me, there is a difference in how they're accepted. I think it's quite ironic that we're sat here in South Asian Heritage Month while there's riots in the
yeah.
country, and I I really, really feel like at times when things like these happen, I go back to square one in terms of my identity and how much I really do fit in, how much the color of my skin matters. In the grand scheme of things, I think it
Mm.
does kind of raise questions and doubts about your sense of belonging.
I think for me, it's like my husband he was asking like, have you experienced anything like this before in Denmark? And I'm like, yes and no, because you experience it in small doses every day, but because again, like there are not that many immigrants, people of color, brown people, so you don't experience it in the same way. So like this experience is very different for me. And obviously like I'm a bit I don't know about other people, but I'm a bit I absorb things quite a lot. So when people post something like a lot about something, I need to take a step away from it and look at it, see it in my own time. So it's like, for instance, somebody today sent me a link for a video, and I replied back, I'm very firm about my boundaries. I replied back, could you please not send me any videos about the riots or whatever is going on because I'm completely aware, but I need to see this in my own time. Unfortunately, she didn't understand and ended up sending me like a 2 minute long voice note explaining what the video was doing, like what was shown on that video. And I was like, you missed my point. So I'm just like taking a step back. I didn't reply back, but I'm really much a person like that. I need to absorb things in my own time rather than people just saying, oh, Sarah, look at this or look at that. And I think it's like, especially in times like this, is something that we need to be mindful of as well, that not everybody is ready or able to be exposed to these pictures, be it pictures, videos, or whatever it is. And it doesn't mean that people don't see it or people don't experience it. It just means that they cope with it or, process it in a different way.
Yeah, no, no. And I think we have to be respectful of that. Absolutely. Because actually, social media is a fabulous place. Of course it is, because that's how we've connected and kind of got to know each other. However, equally, you can, especially if you're someone who's an empath and someone who's quite reflective, it does trigger you in different ways as well,
Mm,
I guess. What I mentioned earlier about the identity, absolutely. Even though I haven't seen much, the bits that I have seen have really made me question my identity. It's really
mm,
exposed me to a part of me that maybe I haven't tapped into for quite some time because I've been busy playing mummy and trying to juggle X, Y, and Z. But the recent events have made me go bing, 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 bing in terms
mm,
of, what does this mean for us type of thing,
mm,
for sure. But equally, for me moving to the UK, I feel like I have also found a sense of identity in terms of freedom, in terms of
mm,
independence, experiences, exposure to different cultures. And I think for me, that's been absolutely beautiful in terms of
mm.
my growth, my personal growth, because the different people that you meet help you grow in different ways.
Different, like the conversations you have with people, or like, I think it's like one of them things that, again, it brings you back to like when I started wearing my hijab till I stopped. And I was so surprised how many people reached out to me afterwards to ask me questions like, how did other people perceive that you stopped wearing hijab because they considered the same? And some of them were people who like grown up wearing hijab and it was just not part of their identity or like being. And I think it it makes you realize how much more we connect with each other without even like realizing, or we influence other people without even realizing that other people are actually watching what we do. And 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 quite often it's also just about having the courage to ask that question. How did you, I think it's like one of my big things is like if I want something or if I admire somebody for something, I would tell them, and I always aim to do that. And I try to be an open person. So when people feel like there's something they want to know more about, and I have that knowledge, that they feel like they can come to me for that knowledge. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that point,
No,
but
no,
yeah.
no, 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 no. No, no, no. I get it completely because for me, it's about integration. I am a massive advocate for integration and to be inclusive, to make sure that you open up those doors and welcome others into different pockets of your life, because otherwise, how on earth are we going to function as a society if we're all in separate lanes, not speaking to each other, not talking to each other? In order for us to really thrive, we need to
Mm,
be learning from one another in a really respectful way. And I think,
mm,
credit to you for being that person as well, where you're open for people to ask you questions, but equally be confident enough to ask other people questions.
mm,
I would like to think that I have had a massive, positive, hopefully, impact on my Caucasian, non-Asian, non-Muslim friends,
mm.
because over the years, they have learned so much.
We only like connected a couple of months ago, isn't it? And I can't even recall. Do you remember how we connected?
No
I
idea.
can't recall. I honestly do not remember.
I think like-minded people always come together
Yeah,
somehow. I think that's
yeah,
just how life works. And I think it's
yeah.
just that openness, that transparency, that
Yeah,
kindness.
because I really think that I saw something and I commented on it and we got talking, but I really cannot think of what it was or like which context it was in. But I really much think that it was something you shared that I had like randomly seen and I commented on it.
Mm. But again, for me, that's important. I've always been that person, and I am mindful that it's quite eccentric and behaviors in some ways, actually.
Mm,
But wanting to do a blog and wanting to do a podcast and wanting to share an Instagram profile of places, I just feel quite passionate about it, not because I want to
mm,
be an attention seeker, but I really want to share the love. I really want to learn. I
mm,
want people to learn, because communication's quite a key aspect to
mm.
connection. And
Definitely.
without human connection, we'd be quite lost as individuals. Is there anything else you would like to say before we go? Anything you would like, any parting wisdom that you would like to share for South Asian Heritage Month?
I'm just thinking like free to be me. You asked what that means to us now. Some reflection on where would we would be with like our identities in 5, maybe 10 years. I have not reflected on this myself, so because I think we have like quite similar because I can relate to this thing, where you move country, you have children, you get married, you have children, all of that changes you and we keep changing. And if you ask me that if I would be the person I am today, if you asked me if I would be this person 5 years ago, I would have said no because I could not have imagined myself being the person I am. If you asked me if I would be doing what I do today, 5 years ago, I would have said no way because my plans for life was very different. Yeah, plans for life were very different. Yeah, life is life, isn't it? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Like, where would you
Well,
be?
for sure. I feel like, we plan and Allah plans. And yeah, my life has not turned out anywhere near as what I thought it would do. But what this country has given me is that sense of freedom. I work as a social worker, and I'm not sure if that's a career path that being raised in Azad Kashmir would have allowed me to be. So I feel
Yeah,
like I'm in the right place. I'm on track.
yeah.
And I think meeting different people is something that brings me a lot of joy that I hold on to quite closely. And I'm just hoping that in the next 5, 10 years, I just hope that I'm lucky and privileged enough to meet like-minded people that help me grow in the right way, in a positive way. And I hope I can offer the same to the people that walk into my life. I hope I pass some kindness to them as well along the way. And I guess that's my hope for the
Mm.
next 5, 10, or however many years there are. Thank you for telling me about South Asian Heritage Month, by the way. I didn't even know it existed. So I appreciate you for sharing it with me and thinking of me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.